right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Happy Pride Month, and welcome to the Arthur Summer Rotenberg Suicide and Depression Studies Program Public Speaker Series on Suicide Research. So I am Sakina Rizvi. I chair this program here at the University of Toronto, St. Michael's Hospital. And again, our goal here is knowledge sharing. There's so much interesting work going on around the world, and we want to basically let the public know. And so, in that vein, if there's something you want to know more about, please use our feedback form that's going to be in the chat. So, we have been doing this lecture series monthly since September, and this is going to be our last one for the season. And I want to first off give a huge thanks to Haley Wright, Jackie Jagoda, and Anna Kyriakidis, who these lectures wouldn't be happening without them on the ASR team. And just big thank you to the three of you for making all of this happen. You can also sign up for updates on who will be coming next in our September, once we resume in September in the chat. Also, please, just as a reminder to use the QA at the bottom that I'll be monitoring for questions once Dr. Price has done her talk. So also, I like to mention before we start any talk, like these talks definitely are meant to inspire and provide hope, but we're also talking about suicide still. It's also a tough topic. So being mindful of whatever it is that you need. We are recording these sessions. If you need to take a step away or do anything to support yourself, please make sure you're always you're prioritizing that. Feel free to also let us know where you're coming from in the chat. We'd like to know where people are coming from. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Myeshia Price. She's an associate professor in the Human Development Program within the Department of Applied Psychology and Education and Research Methodology in the School of Education, and an associate research scientist with the Kinsey Institute. So their primary research interest areas include gender and sexual development. Current area of research focuses on the rich experiences of LGBTQ plus youth in the US, including risk and protective factors for suicidality. And Dr. Price's research, further explores the specific experiences of transgender and non-binary young people, as well as the experiences of young people who hold multiple identities that are socially marginalized, like LGBTQ plus youth of color. Their work and op-eds have also been featured in popular press, including Time Magazine and Scientific American. He's currently consulting editor of the Journal of Sex Research and served as treasurer for Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality. So Dr. Price is going to talk to us today about suicide risk in to us LGBTQ plus youth. And thank you so much for joining us, and welcome. I'll pass it on to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to do that thing where I ask if everyone can see the slides, and we're good to go.
You're good to go.
All right, so I'm going to skip that because you did a great job introducing it. And we're going to go to this. Since you're already in the chat, I'm just going to ask folks. It's Pride Month. I want to start off with something fun. If you have any plans, drop them in the chat. I would love to know what folks are doing, if you're doing anything. And if you're not and you want inspiration, check out what folks are doing in there. Because hopefully you're doing something. It doesn't have to be going to an event. I didn't used to go to Pride events, which is shocking to people. I'm a little bit more introverted, in that I find huge events like that exhausting, and they're always in June here in the U.S., which is hot. It's very hot. I've lived in Southern California, and it's hot all the time. Now I'm in Indiana, and it's also very hot in June, and combine that with humidity. But it's kind of changed for me a little bit. So I see folks are saying that they're helping out social media. They're going to Pride events. They went to them yesterday. Great. And then during the pandemic, a lot of this moved from in-person things. So we did a lot of Pride and events in our homes, which was great. So we still found ways to celebrate and be within community. But I have since switched and I started going to Pride events because I have kids. And to me, it's important to show what that can look like. In particular, I guess relatively recently adopted a trans youth. And for me, it's important for that was his first, this right here, he was 13, was his first time ever going to a Pride event, seeing what that was like. And to me, that's important. It's important to show young people what their futures can look like. Show them adults, what it's like to be an adult in that space, and that other people like them exist in the world. So I am headed to a Pride event this Saturday. It might not be the parade because, again, trying to figure out what that looks like. But we do a lot of Pride stuff. So I've shifted my what I do to make sure that they can see themselves um, around others. So moving on to the talk. I'm gonna set you all up great. I'm going to start by going over values. Those are my values and the frameworks that I do in my work because it's important for you to know where I'm coming from so that, and I will, spoiler alert, the idea being that we all have our own bias, and I want to call them biases, I would call them lens through which we see things, and that informs the work that we do. Um, so it's important that you know mine. Then I'll give you just a little bit of background information on some of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about, and so that we're all on the same page. So when I use certain terms, you know what I mean when I say them. And I will give you some snippets of why we talk about suicidality among LGBTQ youth. Then I'm going to give you some of those findings. And I was just mentioning at the front of this, they are kind of hard to see at times. I do this work all the time. And there are times when I struggle when I see certain statistics, um, because they're hard to see. So yeah, just step away. I won't be offended. I won't even notice. If you want to come back because this last piece is why we're all here. We want to know what we can do. And I'm not going to give you these broad abstract concepts. I'm going to give you tangible things that you can do. You can leave here and do them for free 99. Or if you want to do a little bit more work, some of these take a little bit more work. But they're not difficult. And that's important to me because I don't like when people give me huge problems and there's nothing I can do. I'm just left with this empty space of like, great, now I feel sad. I won't leave you there, I promise. We're going to leave here with like, yes, this is not as daunting as I thought it was. Um, so yes, like I said, this is the values that I'm bringing and the framework that I use when I do this work. The first one I already said, our research is seen through this lens, through a lens. And it starts off with this idea, it starts off with what we see, right? Everyone sees things differently. That's just how human brains work, our eyes. We all know this when there's a eyewitness testimony. Then what question gets asked? Starting with the research. This is the research, the scientific process, but it all starts in how that research is framed, how the hypothesis, right, in terms of whether I'm interested in, like there are folks who are interested in detransitioning of trans youth. And that's not something I'm interested in. And if I am, I'm interested in it for a totally different reason that others may be interested in, right? Um, so we all have this lens. And that's why I like to start any research presentation I do by saying that I myself am queer, Black, I'm queer in both my sexuality and gender. I'm Black, and I just mentioned my kids. I'm solo parent of, well, no, my kid is 8. The youngest is 8. Um, and I just said that I adopted a trans youth. The youngest had a period where he's assigned male at birth. He had a period where he was using they, them pronouns. Now he's obviously using he, him, but still says I'm non-binary. So we're working with him. We're working with him in these worlds. But these are the things that I'm bringing to this work. I have a PhD in developmental psychology, which means that I see things through that lens of I'm not a social worker. I'm not in public health, but I collaborate with those folks because they bring a different lens than a developmental psychologist would bring. All of those things inform and shape the work that I do and the questions that I ask when I approach this work. I also am, which is important as well, um, licensed to do foster care. And so in April, another kid entered into my home who is 7. So he's here as well. So I got a lot going on here. It informs all the work that I do. Another aspect of the work I do is the way that I see these issues that we discuss is that LGBTQ youth are at higher risk because of the way that they're treated. And this seems pretty obvious, but I think sometimes we get stuck on why are we seeing these things? Is it them? Is it the identity? And it's not. There's a middle person here called stigma. The middle person here is how they are treated. If we work on that, that's where the focus I like to think about is. We take that away, then these poor mental health things that we're seeing will be, they won't go away because not everyone at some point, but there are other things that can be happening in a person's life that can impact their mental health. But we see these higher risk in LGBTQ young people because of the specific stigma that they face because of their identity. So that's the important piece to think about here. Relatedly, there's intersectionality. When I talk about intersectionality, what I mean is that there are different aspects of a young person or people in general that is going to inform their experiences. A lot of times, one of the things that happens is we tend to focus on LGBTQ and we forget that they're bringing a lot more to the table. Um, and so that's not really an option when in the work that I do. I also understand because I do a lot of numbers, so my work is quantitative. And so there are often times when you have to have so many people in order to do the work that I do. And so that's where sample size is important. So some people are saying, I don't have the sample to do these different groupings, and I can't tell you what's specifically happening with um, just specifically trans men in my sample. Yes, I understand that's a limitation. But it's important to acknowledge that. And that's the lens that I come from is um, let's not pretend this is going to apply to everyone. Just acknowledge that you don't have the ability for this to apply to everyone. So that's what I mean when I say intersectionality is not optional. The last piece here that's important to the work that I do is exactly why I'm talking here today. A lot of times in academia, we do these really fancy studies and then we publish them in journals that are behind paywalls. And then the people who read them or even have access to them for free are other people doing the exact same work. Um, People can't understand half of what's in there, and they definitely aren't going to pay $25 or $65 or however much people are charging in journals for to read them. I am not even going to pay to read someone else's research, and I want to read them and I can understand everything that's in there, let alone my parents or someone else who may actually need to get this research. So for me, it's important to take my work, make it digestible for anyone, so that it can actually be used by the people who need it most. So that's those are the values and framework that I bring to this. Now I'm going to move on, just to have some sort of common ground around some of these um, topics that we're going to be discussing. The first of which is a sexual orientation. Sorry, I'll go back. I moved it pretty quickly. Sexual orientation and gender identity. Just because I don't want to assume that people are coming in here with the same understanding. With sexual orientation, we're talking about three different things, which is identity, behavior, and attraction. So identity being one's internal sense of their own sexuality and the label that they choose to identify with or use to describe themselves. Then you have behavior, which are how people experience or express their sexuality. And the last one is a person's sense of sexual or romantic desire for contact or connection with people. You can see how some of that is sort of overlapping and for many people. Sexual orientation is thought to be all three of those, right? Now, these can be the same. So someone can identify as gay, have sex with people of the same sex or gender, um, and is interested in sexual or romantic relationships with someone of the same sex and gender. Or they can be totally different from one another. But even if we don't think the behavior or and attractions are matching, we still don't get to determine another person's identity for them. That's personal. We don't get to say, well, looks like you're doing things with someone else, and so we're going to go ahead and label you however we want. That's a very personal experience for someone. It's also important to acknowledge that during adolescence, these things are mismatched more often than they are for adults. And that's the period that I'm most interested in. So these may not be because this is a point where they're trying to figure themselves out. The reason these are this color, I like this a lot, and this came from the Trevor Project's coming out handbook. Well, I'll get to that in a little bit, but I did work at the Trevor Project before as part of the research team there. But I like this because it's not boxed off, it's not separate categories, are kind of blending together, which actually gives more credit to what the experience is usually like for people. And the same is true for gender identity with the way this is colored. I like this um, better than having these separate boxes for folks. Gender is also sort of composed of these multiple things, but there's less consensus. We agree less in research in the field about what those separate things are. But generally, they're thought to be gender identity and sex assigned at birth. Um, so gender identity is, again, we're talking about one's internal sense of who they are and what that label might be, or lack thereof. So not having a label at all, and what feels correct to them. The sex assigned at birth is a sex category that a person is assigned when they're born. Usually that's by a doctor or by a person's family. Um, I think now we can start thinking about this happening before birth. When we think about those gender reveal parties, like this is gender is sort of ingrained even before people are born, right? We start sort of having these ideas of who they are and what they're going to be like even before they're born. Sometimes we even prescribe what is happening to the person who's carrying them even before they're born, based on what we think their sex is. We can also talk about consider gender expression as part of gender, and that's just both someone's internal or external idea of who they are and how they express their gender. This could be choices of clothing, hairstyle, language, and mannerisms. And this also includes pronouns, so gendered pronouns. We spend a lot of time sort of beating it over people's heads, telling people that that gender and sex orientation are not related at all. And it's true. And I think it's important to continue to say that. So someone who is assigned male at birth, who isn't hyper masculine, so they may have feminine qualities, for example, their expression of their gender might have some femininity in it, doesn't automatically mean that they're gay. And that's the important piece here. However, I think where things become a little bit more complicated is when we start to think about if someone is non-binary in their gender, a lot of the labels that we have for sexual orientation are inherently gendered. So when we think about lesbian, we think about gay, the definition of those are a man who's attracted to another man, a woman who's attracted to another woman. So this will come up a little bit later, but a lot of times the young people who are non-binary are not identifying with those labels because they are inherently gendered. And just to talk a little bit more about gender, because this will come up a little bit later. If anyone has seen this study before, this is a research study where the research basically labeled these babies. They just told people they came in for a study, they said, hey, this is a boy. Or they said, hey, this is a girl. If you know anything about babies, which really gets to people a lot when people can't figure out, some parents, not all parents, are bothered when their baby is gendered a boy or girl and they have to figure out ways to undo this. But because you can't really tell if a baby's a boy or girl. And so they labeled them. And so what people did was they assigned a certain emotion based on whether they thought this baby was a boy or a girl. Now the baby was doing the exact same thing, but people decided that when they were labeled a boy, they they put certain labels about the baby being angry, upset. When they labeled the baby a girl, the researchers labeled the baby a girl. They were less angry, and they were more afraid. Meanwhile, the expression was the exact same. So this study was meant to say that We have biases, so we have to be important when we're thinking about we think about gender expression, we think about what's happening with folks and how they're interpreting gender and what is happening, particularly to young people and children and people in general as they're growing up in the world around them. Because we have these implicit things that are happening around gender and how adults are interpreting even something as simple as an infant's emotional expression. And I thought when I saw this study when I was in grad school, and I was like, I can't wait to do that when I get a kid, like a baby. I'm gonna just pick and choose one day. And then I had a baby, and if anyone here has kids, they realize that they're exhausted. They can't remember where they put their keys. Sometimes they find their keys in the freezer. And I forgot this study existed for a very long time because I was busy trying to keep a human being alive that was actively trying to not be alive. And then as my kid got older, my kid naturally did this on his own. And so I got to see it in real life, and I'm still getting to see it to this day. Because this is my kid. This was him in kindergarten. And so this was the same time period. I think these pictures were taken just a few months apart. And then this one, on the right, my right left. This is I mean, you can say this kind of presents a little bit more feminine in terms of the dress style. This kid is very much so into dressing himself. I chose none of this. And this other picture was at a food truck thing. I don't know why he was angry, but he was. And in both situations, this kid was gendered a girl. So it's interesting to me because they categorically ignore whatever this kid is wearing and they just see the hair. And he doesn't care because that's just the way he experiences gender. Um, but it does make a difference in how people treat him. And I've noticed that just in my day to day. And this is just my little thing about gender, but I find it fascinating. The other things that I just want to point out really quickly is there are a lot of different acronyms. Do I have it? Yes, I have it circled for LGBTQ plus. I tend to stop, and that's not because I don't like them or I don't care. It just feels that to me, it starts to feel like saying African American instead of Black. And if I had someone tell me they had a lot of African American friends, I wouldn't believe them because I feel like Black just feels shorter. Um, African American feels very formal. It is very much so different than Black, which I acknowledge and understand. I hope I'm making sense. African American is a very different experience, whereas Black is a full term that encompasses anyone. But it still feels different to hear someone say that in a very informal conversation. Similarly, when it comes to the use of sexual gender minority, that's very common in government here in the US specifically. Academia uses it. If you're writing a grant, they like to see that language. I don't like to define someone for who they aren't. So I don't really use that sort of terminology. Um, uh, then I think I have another slide for this, talking about transgender and non-binary as an umbrella term. I use it to define young people fully. So I tend to just, unless for some reason I have separated them to talk about things that are happening, the specific context of being trans versus being non-binary, then I will talk about those experiences separately. Um, but something I've found is that young people don't always identify as transgender if they're non-binary. I won't go into, we've figured this out on our surveys. We've asked them separately. And so it does make things a little complicated if you only ask about being transgender. We've also found that non-binary being a label in and of itself can be confusing for young people. So they will identify as a term that is considered within the non-binary identity, but they will say they are not non-binary. So they may say, I'm genderqueer, which I'll show this thing right here. So they will say, yes, I'm genderqueer, but I'm not non-binary because that is an identity label. Um, so it does make things, it is a label and a descriptor, similar to transgender is a label and a descriptor, meaning that I identify as something that is not the sex that I was assigned at birth. But it does make things a little complicated for a 13-year-old who doesn't understand those concepts the same way that we do and we use them in academic sense. Um, so this is just a little, that's to make sure we're on the common ground, and you know what I mean when I use those words. This is the background. I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. But this is just why we talk about this. And that's just to say that suicide is the leading cause of death among young people here in the US between the ages of the second leading cause between the ages of 10 to 24. And even so, we know that LGBTQ plus young people are at even higher risk than their straight and their straight cis peers. And that's at 4 times more likely to attempt suicide compared to their peers. We also know, and this is what I mentioned before, that um, the reason we're seeing this is because of the stress that they're experiencing. So there's chronic stressors when we're talking about experiencing discrimination, we're talking about experiencing rejection, harm due specifically to their identity. And that's combined with everyday stress of just being a young person. So school's hard. There's a breakup. Parents are divorcing. They have to move. They're maybe they're not able to find a job or whatever the case may be. On top of, so they're experiencing not only just the regular things any young person would be experiencing, but now they have to experience something specifically due to their identity. And so that's making them more susceptible to these negative mental health outcomes. And then you also have to think about what it would be like to have more than one of these stigmatized identities, right? So now you have to think about what it would be like to not only be queer, but to also be Native, right? So you have Native Indigenous identity on top of being queer. So when we see this, we see they're even more susceptible to some of these negative mental health outcomes because now they can experience discrimination not only based on their LGBTQ plus identity, but also their racial ethnic identity. But and this is the reason why we're here. We do know that an important part of the minority stress model is that there are protective factors that can get in there and disrupt some of this negative things that we see here. So we know that there are certain things that can stop that path from happening. That's what I'm going to get to after I tell you the unfortunate part of what we actually see happening. So, as I mentioned before, I'm going to talk about some stats. Heavy topic. You're welcome to put me on mute and come back once you see all these slides go through, or whatever makes you feel good about coming to the good part. As I mentioned, I was previously the director of research at the Trevor Project. I'm using these slides. I will give you like a slide or two that are academic peer-reviewed studies, but like I said, some of those words are ridiculous. A lot of those are not accessible in terms of the language that's used in there, the stats that are used in there. They're not fun, they're not pretty. These are. This is from 2023. The Trevor Project has a recent one. Please go find it. You don't have to use this. It's free, and you can, as long as you cite it and as long as you use make sure it's clear that it's the Trevor Project, you can also use them. And I say this because sometimes people need to see actual numbers to believe what you're saying. Unfortunately, they need someone else, not you. And I say this because I have experienced this in my personal life. Sometimes they need to see actual facts presented to them. So if you're working in a situation where you feel like, hey, I'm pushing up against the wall, no one's believing my subjective experience, pull some numbers. The Trevor Project also has state level data, um, and I'm not sure what where they are at their international work. It's not huge, but I do know they have some, particularly Mexico is one of them. Anyway, this is the work that was getting done when I was there, so I'm going to use it just to make sure that I'm honoring um, the relationship. So at the time, again, this is not the newest data, but 14% of LGBTQ young people had attempted suicide in the past year, and 41% had seriously considered suicide. And you don't have to hold them in your head, but if you just want to think 14, 41, I'm going to start giving you some of that intersectional stuff now, because it's important because this is overall. Um, and you can see some of it here, but I will get into that. We can see what starts to happen when we think about age. Younger, the younger ones um, are having more suicidality. We can also see what's happening within trans, within gender identity. So when we look at the cisgender, these are still, they're still LGBTQ, all of them. But even within that population, the young people who are trans and non-binary are reporting higher rates, with the trans men reporting the highest. And I point this out because oftentimes a lot of our funding is focused on trans women, which is great. But we still have to remember that trans men are also experiencing negative mental health outcomes. And then we have findings that are looking at sexual orientation, and we see that I like to call them multisexual. So the young people who are attracted to and or identifying as um, interested in more than one gender, a sex or gender, are experiencing more higher rates of suicidality. And you can also see, wait, let me I said I was going to talk about this. This is because more of the young people who are identifying as trans and non-binary are also identifying as this. So we know the rates of trans and non-binary are higher. They're also identifying as this because, like I mentioned, picking gay or lesbian doesn't quite work there because their identity is not a man or a woman. We also see questioning's pretty high, and there are a lot of reasons for that. So this is where I'm going to throw a little bit of fancier research at you because I was interested in what's going on here as well. So there's a paper in the Journal of Sex Research that looks at this, and we similarly found that there's a higher rate of trans and non-binary youth who are also questioning their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so you have to remember that these are young people. They're still trying to figure themselves out. And so a lot of times what's happening is that they may have a good sense of their gender and where they are with their gender, but then it kind of messes with, okay, but what does that mean about my sexual orientation? Can I still be this if now I'm that? And so a lot of times when they're filling these surveys out, they're like questioning, unsure. And then we're looking at the regions within the US. And based on a lot of what we know about the socio-political climates in these the South and the Midwest, one would expect these to be much different. They are slightly higher, but they're not significantly different from one another when we think about stats and fancy numbers. Um, and so I do want to point out that suicide is it's not just one thing that's going to be specifically having, that's what we say, right? So there's a lot going on. So there could be protective factors in these climates. As someone who lives in the Midwest, I'm very aware that there are protective factors here. Um, and so that's important to note. I like to show this map of the US, and this is where there are are anti-LGBTQ laws that were instated. This the in the red. Green is where there are more positive laws. And you can see that it looks pretty much exactly like what we're looking at here for young people. So we wanted to look at this statistically and look at, is it actually impacting the state laws? Are they actually causing suicide attempts? Because we couldn't say that before, because all of these data were collected at the same time. So we couldn't make a causal inference about it. And turns out, yes, it is. We do know that state level anti-trans laws are actually increasing past year suicide attempts among specifically transgender and non-binary young people within the US. And that is important because these laws are directly impacting their mental health. And so when we see this, you kind of think, yes, we can see something happening here. But this is the bread and butter of something is actually happening here. Then we can look at it intersectionally by race and ethnicity, and this is essentially what I was talking about before, and that these young people have experiences that go beyond just their sexuality and or gender identity. And you can also see, we consistently saw every year that young people who identified with more than one race or ethnicity um, had pretty high rates. And so we also noticed that people were not talking about this or looking into it. I'm gonna I'm gonna speed through this a little bit because I want to get to the good part. But we have reports. Again, these are free. This is something that um, I needed to do this. Like I thought no one else is doing this. We have the numbers, we have the data. Let's write reports and put them out for free for people to use. And a lot of times these are the only times where there's a cross section among young people with race and LGBTQ status like this. And so sometimes you find them on grants, you find them in very important things, um, because it's really hard for people to collect this data. And we just had the resources to do it at the time. So the first one was the one that was on Black LGBTQ youth. And then we just started putting them out over the years. Like I said, these are free. You can, if you just honestly, if you just put in something close to this in Google, this will be one of the first things. These will be one of the first things to pop up because there just aren't that many out there. And so I won't go into a lot of the details. I'll just give you the like top line findings of them because um, they are free. But one of the things that we found with the Black youth mental health is they have very similar outcomes. They have very similar rates of suicidality, but less access to mental health. They're accessing mental health services a lot lower. Some of that being that they can't really trust. They feel like they can't trust mental health care providers. Um, they can't trust people in general. There's a fear of setting up the appointment. They feel like it will be ineffective. Um, and so some of the things that we saw on this one. In the AAPI report, we did see something related to outness. And we also saw there's a lot of discussion, and it has come up before during the month of celebration here in the U.S. That this sort of combining of like the fact that it's called AAPI, so the Asian American and Pacific Islander Native Hawaiian experience is very different, and people talk about that a lot when the month is happening. And we did see some of that come out in this report, in that the suicide rates were much higher among Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian LGBTQ plus youth. Um, and so that's why that combining young people is often criticized. And people say, well, we don't have the sample size to pull them apart. Fully understand. Um, and it's very valid. But this is illustrating why that can often be problematic when we see that some young people are struggling more than others. And if we don't pull them apart, those who need resources most often don't get them. So yeah, that's something that we did notice here. And that outness was sometimes associated with higher rates of poor mental health, when we often see that as a way of getting access to community. Um, Intersex, we did one on intersex youth, and these are specifically intersex youth who identify as LGBTQ, because you can be intersex and identify as straight and cis. And so this was an important paper because they have unique stressors, unique experiences, because intersex youth are often subjected to conversion therapy from mental health professionals, um, at the same time that it's also happening at home. So there's social and medical pressure to with their gender. Parental acceptance and family support were super powerful for intersex youth, as one might imagine. It's also important to note that these policies that are built around the assumption of sex and gender that are binary within the US are inherently problematic for intersex youth. They're sort of forcing this categorization of people into groupings that are either male or female on the basis of these observable physical characteristics. It does not work. It specifically does not work, and we know it doesn't because people exist in this intersex world. And then I mentioned this multiracial LGBTQ youth, and ultimately research has just failed to acknowledge the disparities that we see here, particularly compared to their monoracial LGBTQ youth. So that's why this report was so important to us to do. And it just also acknowledges that the experiences of multiracial youth, LGBTQ youth, are different, even within multiracial communities, which does complicate this topic, but it doesn't mean we should steer away from addressing it at all. We also did a paper on Latinx LGBTQ youth. This one was the thing I really liked about this one is that we found that there was a difference, a difference in suicide rates between those who were Latinx and those who were not. But that difference fully disappeared when we considered their worries about immigration status. And that's huge because we rarely ever see a difference like that disappear in their past, in the likelihood of attempting suicide in the past year. And so it suggests that if we start considering, um, if we're doing anything, um, we should take into account the worries about and stress about immigration, um, that they're experiencing, particularly in the current context, right? A lot of structural inequities are not pictured here, but that's what we see when we're talking about Indigenous LGBTQ youth mental health. Now we're going to move on to the things that are a lot of why we all showed up here. Um, I know we're running short on time, but I just would like a little bit of dropping in the chat. What are some things that we think might work? What could be some important protective factors? When we think about ways to counter some of these experiences for young people. Definitely community, supportive adults. Yeah, absolutely. Seeing if you all can do it and we can just skip to the Q&A. No. Listening and learning. Yeah, absolutely. These are all it. So the right people came here. Yeah. So as some of you already mentioned, affirming spaces, huge. And the idea of this being, particularly if they have to be there, it should be a space where they feel safe, affirmed in who they are. I can be who I am in this space. It's so crucial. And this, I think, I particularly like to yell at schools because we're forcing them to be there. They have to be there by law. And this is just a paper that we asked young people, what are you looking for, right? So we use affirming space all the time, but what are they looking for when they're trying to figure out if it's affirming? And they're honestly like the bar is pretty low. They're like, does it have a pride flag? Like, are you doing these little tiny things, right? And we also found that it is, importantly, we do see this 20% lower odds of attempting suicide in the past year if their school is affirming. Again, this is more about the impact of affirming spaces. I mean, this is about affirming people. So we can see this lower rate of suicide if they have a supportive family, they have supportive friends. And what are they looking for, right? Again, I think people feel like they have to do a lot, right? Just being welcoming to their friends or partners, right? Talking to them respectfully about their identity, using their name and pronouns correctly, supporting their gender expression. These are not, they're not asking you to, these are free. Like they're not asking you to parents and caregivers to go out of their way. They're not asking you to do heavy remodeling in your home. These are things that are just letting them be. And that's the important piece here, is let me be me. And that's a pretty low bar, right? And I think, sorry, I'm trying to see what this says, educating themselves. Um, because a lot of times there's a lot of I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but when you feel like you're constantly the person educating everyone around you on things, that's a lot. So it doesn't really require a lot of effort to just put a couple of things in Google, look up some things through trusted trusted things. And I am supposed to have resources, and I sincerely apologize. I was supposed to send those ahead of time. All these links I was supposed to send to you. Um, and I will get those. But it's super easy. And I think once you have that, the next thing you can do is say, hey, I understand that some people identify as queer mean this, but what do you mean? Right? Because that's a personal thing. You already demonstrated that you have a general sense of it, but what's their personal experience is a very different conversation. And I promise you, if there's one thing that young people like to do is talk about themselves. And they like to hear that someone else is interested in their personal experiences. What do they want you to know? Again, this is how you can be supportive. The number one thing that they're asking from people is support and acceptance. That requires absolutely nothing. It doesn't even require you to do the Google thing. It just requires you to just let them be, right? They want you to know about gender identity, sexual orientations, again, that base level, and then letting them talk about who they are. Pronouns. What are they? You can start by saying yours. And then if they want to share theirs, they can, but at least they know that you have a sense of what that means and that they could be different from what you're assuming of someone, right? This is just a paper again, throwing out some peer-reviewed stuff. I won't go into detail, but it is illustrating from a very scientific way that yes, this actually does work. We see that youth who report higher levels of acceptance from any adult are nearly 40%, have a nearly 40% lower odds of past year suicide attempt. So this is literally life-saving, and that's important to keep in mind. And yes, it is different from peers and adults. These are very different processes. They are not forgetting that their adults in their lives are important just because they became teenagers. Um, Using their pronouns, again, this is one of my favorite graphics. It goes down. Their rate of suicide goes down as people are using the pronouns. That doesn't require a lot of people. This is gender identity acceptance. Same thing. We see lower rates of suicide by accepting their gender identity. This is something that's important too, because gender identity, some people can be very open when it comes to sexual orientation, but for some reason it drops off when it comes to trans and non-binary youth. So they do require you to specifically address that you are open and acceptance to their identity as trans, their identity as non-binary. These are just some things that are a little bit harder because they do require money. But access to gender non-binary, no, gender neutral bathrooms, we do see that when they have that at school, there's a lower rate of suicide in the past year. And when they have access to binders, shapewear, gender affirming clothing, we're not even talking about the thing that people are most mad about. We're not talking about hormones or anything like that. We're not talking about hormones. We're not talking about surgery. We're just talking about clothes. We're talking about maybe a haircut. When they have access to these things, their rates of suicide go down. And this is talking about gender affirming hormones, but it is life-saving. Quick summary. They have unique LGBTQ plus youth have unique factors that impact their mental health and well-being. But we can do something about that. These really small, I call them small because they're not costly, except those couple that I did go over. Supportive ways can be life-saving. They know how to scan to look to see if you're a safe person. They can do that work. And all you have to do is be sure to put that out there for them. Like I said, be obvious and specific, particularly for trans youth. They do need that. They do need to know that I'm safe here. Specifically, my identity is safe here. And also just a reminder that one size doesn't fit all. It will have to look different. And particularly sometimes that action is required, which is, this verb thing. The action is some of these young people are like, you have to walk the walk. You can't just talk the talk. I need you to show up. Show up and show me that you're here for me. And so that's the important piece here. Just leaving on the note that we can do something. There's a lot of negativity out there, but a lot of that is happening a little bit more removed from young people. When they're seeing you in their day to day, those are the things that are going to make a difference and add up for them. And I think this is the Q&A time. If we have time. We do have time? Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
definitely, definitely. There's definitely gonna be questions. That was wonderful. Thank you. I think you really did leave us on that kind of peace on hope, and that wow, there's so much that you can do, but just by just the power of just letting people be them and be their authentic selves, like how much that can shift things, um, is so important. One thing that was in one of the slides in terms of creating affirming spaces was on microaggressions, and
Mm,
I was curious about, in creating affirming spaces, that adults doing that, whether it's parents, teachers, guardians, maybe who don't have as much knowledge, how do you think they can start to become more aware of microaggressions coming from other people, but also themselves?
yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Just first of all, starting off with like full grace in that matter, because
Yeah.
sometimes we mess up and we don't realize that something we've said is hitting someone in the wrong way. And I think being open to that feedback is the first place. Because if someone is telling you that, like, I don't like what you just said, that sort of, I feel like it's sort of, oops, ouch, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
like, hey, I'm sorry that I did that. I'm acknowledging that it hurt you, and I'm gonna not do that again. And I think that is not harping on it, not going on. You don't need a lecture. You don't need to give your thesis about, you know, this is what we did back in the day or anything like that. And all, it is quite simple to just say, oh, you know what? Thank you for telling me that. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that again. I can tell why that was hurtful.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's the first step. But sometimes people don't always say that they don't always feel comfortable speaking up like that.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of tools. I mean, that's the great thing about the world we live in. Yes, the internet can be problematic, but can also be a place where it's like full of resources and full of things that are out there to help guide us in these ways. So I would recommend just going out there and, like I said, finding a trusted source. There's a lot. I know that the American Psychological Association has safe language guidelines and things like that that can help support some of that. And a lot of these things are updated. I feel like maybe there's a lot of um, I'm being a little careful because I know some things have unfortunately gotten taken over. But there are pediatric websites that are very good for these things that can help with, being careful. Not, I'm going to say being careful, but being cognizant of some of the language that we use. But we're not always going to, everyone's going to mess up at some point. And it's just a matter being being open to being brought in, right?
Hmm.
Brought
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
when someone is sort of saying, "Hey, I didn't like that," and then you
Yeah.
being like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah. So being like humble, learning, and being self-reflexive,
Hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to take you to some questions from the audience, and Charles was saying he's got a 15,000 online community that provides gender affirming voice,
Mhm.
but we're unequipped to provide professional services for people that have a dysphoria or other mental health crisis in the community. Do you have any recommended referrals for trusted systems that can handle those needs, especially in light of what you said about some therapists attempting conversion?
Yeah, so I'm not a clinician and I don't my work is purely in the research realm. So I'm not great with like actual referrals. What I will say is that when people are actively when it's an active crisis, right? We do want to refer them to whatever the system is in place in your communities. I know right now in the US we have 988. I know if they're young people, they can also use that. There are also crisis lines that are more local.
Yeah.
I will also say that depending on their age, there might be services that exist within the local communities. that can help support some of that. And then they can refer them to known mental health providers that they have vetted and they know that they are trustworthy. I think the only issue, and this there is a shortage. Again, speaking particularly from the experience in the U.S., there are limitations in providers who are really good at this, and even in places where you would think there would be more, because the ones who are really good, everyone knows them and they want to go to them.
Yeah.
They're like, I love you. I love the work that you do.
Yeah.
But there are absolutely nonprofits communities. Um, again, I'll speak about the Trevor Project. That it's a good starting point, I think, and then branching from them and their whatever resources they have
Yeah.
that can get you
Okay.
there.
Okay, great. Um, there's a question from Deborah. Deborah, I think your question got cut off. If you mind re-adding it to the QA, that would be great. There's another question from Amanda Sark, who said that she'll be joining a task force meeting. Wanted to ask if you or anyone else would be interested in possibly presenting virtually on a volunteer basis or attending virtually for a meeting of the Chicago Missing and Murdered Women and Girls Task Force. They are the vice chair and Senator Hunter is the chair. So they are providing the email if you anyone wants to. It's in the QA. But also, Amanda had a question about I'm familiar with pronouns, but what about titles such as Ms., Mr., etc.? I could use more information on that, please.
Oh yes, honorifics, right? This is my thing. I really want a gender neutral honorific. I've talked about this extensively. And the only things I've been able to come up with are, Your Honor, Your Majesty. Um, we can. There is MX, like, and I think I wish I what I will say is I wish there was one that we all knew. Um, so there are gender neutral things like parent, right, is
Yeah,
in our lexicon.
yeah,
And I'm constantly correcting forms because we have that. It exists. We don't need to say mom or dad. We have a word. Firefighter is another great one. We have a word. It's common. I do wish there was a common one. Doctor is a
yeah,
great one, right? We
yeah,
have them. So
yeah,
yeah, sir, ma'am is unfortunately it does. As a kid, my kids are in Taekwondo and they always say sir, ma'am, and I'm like, oh, can we come up with one? I mean, not can we come up with one? I just really wish there was an existing one that we all knew
yeah,
that was just pre-existing.
yeah.
So yeah, it is. It is.
It's a
That's why
tough one.
it is a tough one.
Yeah, yeah. So there's some discussion in the chat. I'm wondering if you might be able to shed some light on around the term using queer as a term. I think
Mm,
Deborah was talking about um, before it was considered a slur, but now I see it in journals. When did that change? What
yeah,
specifically does it mean in this context? Seeing it more in like academia. So how do you, what are your thoughts on that?
it's a great question. My mom feels the same way. And actually, I feel like it's like whispered. Even gay and lesbian is whispered. It was wait, what language am I looking for? Captured, that's not the word. Reclaimed. There we go.
Hmm.
Reclaimed, taken back. It's not a slur. We're gonna take it back and use it as ours, right? And so that's the best way that I can describe that. And it's gonna differ between who's using it. What I would say is that folks don't really, some people just don't feel comfortable with any of the existing terms because they often are gendered. So even when it's sort of pan, there is a certain gender. The gender labels are used within those definitions.
Yeah.
Not always, but often. And so sometimes I find that people just feel it's easier to just say queer and as like there's nothing hetero or cis going on here. There's nothing heterosexual and or cisgender going on here.
Yeah.
Where it falls, who knows and who cares? But I will say that So again, other people will and may use it differently in terms of how they're using it. But I think there's often a sense of political tie to it, a sense
Mm,
of sort of reclaiming something that was previously used as a sense of harm.
yeah. Okay. Deborah, I hope that answers your question. Maybe we can just end off with one last piece, Maisha. Like with everything that you've talked about today, or maybe other things that maybe you even haven't presented, what do you feel like gives you the most hope based on the current evidence about supporting LGBTQ plus youth?
Hmm. Yeah, I will say that people often feel overwhelmed. There's so many different labels. There's so many different. I don't want to mess it up, right?
Mhm.
Um, and and in my experience, young people just want to be them, even if they're not in the LGBTQ plus community. And they often feel misunderstood. And I feel like we've all been there, right? No one understands. I feel like there's so many songs that are across every generation that are about it's me, it's my experience, and no one gets it. But everyone relates to it because that's
Mhm.
just the experience of being a young person, right? And what we can do to help them is by just listening,
Yeah.
being there as a supportive person is just listening to their experience. You may be
Mm,
thinking, yeah, that's the same thing that everyone goes through. Or yeah, that's what, so and so told me yesterday. But it is theirs and is theirs alone. And the best thing you can do is acknowledge it, validate it, and let them live it. And that is also part of the LGBTQ plus experience. Some of it is unique to their experience as a LGBTQ plus person. Um, but that's not difficult, right? It's easier to step back and listen than it is to feel like you have to know anything.
yeah.
Um, so I think that's a big part of it. And they are in a stage where they love teaching and educating folks. So it's
Mm,
great. It's great for me even to like,
yeah.
even though I can give this lecture, to have a young person tell me most of what's on these slides. I'm like, yes, thank you. I learned
Yeah.
something new today. Because it gives them a sense of
Yeah.
ownership. And so yes, I think it's perfect to realize that a lot of that responsibility can be off of your shoulders and you can just
Mhm.
let them be.
Yeah. It's like at the end of the day, everyone just wants to be loved and understood, right?
Mhm.
And creating space for that is healing and life saving. So I think that that's really an important piece to end off with. I should
Yes.
thank you so much for this. This was really wonderful. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experiences. I think it was really meaningful for everyone here. So thank you again. And as I mentioned before, this is our last one of the season, but we're going to be back on World Suicide Prevention Day on September 10th and speaker TBD. But watch out for our updates on that. And everyone have a wonderful day and hope you're carrying that hope and inspiration in your heart throughout the rest of the day this month and enjoy the rest of Pride Month as well and carry it on through the rest of the year.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.